师傅，这是养生出窍吗？
Hi, welcome to Qigong Project. I'm Robert Kuhns. Today, I'm going to answer some audience questions. I've been saying in recent videos, hey, if you have any questions about Qigong or internal alchemy practice or Chinese energy arts, let me know, and if I can answer them, then I'll give you an answer. So one of the most interesting questions I've had recently is, what's the deal with Daoist sexual arts or with Qigong sexual arts? Can you help clarify this for me? So I decided that we're going to deal with this one today. And I made a whole half-hour video about it. And then I went and read the English language wiki page. Oops. I probably shouldn't have done that, because then I could have kept the old video. But having done it, there's stuff that needs to be addressed. So I'm going to redo the video now. Okay, so let's start at the start. Daoism and Qigong have something called sexual arts. Those arts can go by different names depending on what school of thought that you practice. In the oldest times, they were called fangzhong shu. Fangzhong means bedroom, shu means arts. So fangzhong shu, the bedroom arts. And then also another name for the practice is yin-yang shuangxiu, yin and yang dual cultivation, which means male and female dual cultivation. We're going to talk about both of those in these videos. But I have to say, okay, personally, I don't practice these arts, number one. And number two, my own understanding of them is not mature because I'm not a practitioner of them. So I'm going to approach this in a general way. I'm going to talk about how I understand them to exist, their pros and cons, some historical information about them, and I'm going to push back a little bit against some of the English language sources that are popular in the contemporary Taoist culture, and I'll explain why. Okay, so what's the origin of the so-called bedroom arts? Well, they go back probably at least as far as the end of the Warring States period, the early Han Dynasty. So we're talking maybe 2,200 years, give or take. And these early arts of sexual practice are ostensibly contained within Taoism. But you have to understand that Taoism, as early as the Warring States period and the Han Dynasty period, is not really codified as a school of thought per se. Taoism comes from a philosophical movement, which was founded by Lao Tzu, or a group of people who became known as Lao Tzu, and which was mainly a philosophy about statecraft and a philosophy about how the elite class ought to behave in order to ensure the longevity of the state as well as their personal longevity. Now, one of the things about the early development of Taoism is that sometimes it's not entirely clear where Taoism ends and where Chinese medicine starts, or where Taoism ends and where nurturing life practices, yangsheng, which are very, very important to Qigong in contemporary times, where they start. So can we say that the bedroom arts are a Taoist practice, or are they associated with medicine, or are they associated with life nurturing arts? How should we view this? I don't think there's a consensus about that. So there's some people who just reject the idea that those arts at their origin were Taoist in the first place. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have to consider. Another thing is, some of the documents that deal with those arts have been discovered in more recent times in archaeological excavations, like the Ma Wangdui excavation, where a number of old copies of the Dao De Jing and various medical books were found along with these bedroom art books. And it's really important to understand that the book collection at Ma Wangdui wasn't exclusively Taoist. It was a book collection of basically government officials who had these private libraries, right? So again, just because it's old in Chinese and deals with Qigong stuff doesn't mean necessarily that it's Taoist. So that's the first point I want to make. That's my first bookmark, okay? Moving along, let me give a synopsis from my understanding personally. Fangzhong shu, or bedroom arts, were sexual practices that were popular from, give or take, 200 BC until about 600 AD or so, was the peak of the popularity of those practices. They were essentially practiced by the Chinese elite class, And the practices were essentially designed for the benefit of the men that practiced them. This is a very important point, and it's the first place where I'm going to push back against the view of contemporary Western scholars on this subject, and for good reason. So basically, the premise of bedroom arts is not only about the sexual pleasure of the partners. Okay, this isn't necessarily the same thing as things that people get up to today that are about maximizing pleasure, mutual pleasure, especially, right? The idea of bedroom arts is actually working with the idea that the innate essence of the human body is associated with sexual material, right? So that includes sexual fluids, chi that happens as a result of sexual fluids, other aspects of the body, even things like menstrual fluid, right? All of these things are considered to contain innate productive quality because they can make a baby, right? And Taoist culture thinks that the creation of a new life is the most potent kind of energy. And so these sexual arts, in a sense, are borrowing from Taoist concepts about conception, which is really an essential idea in Taoist practice, right? You try to recreate the conception experience through meditation and through different arts. But then what they do is they apply them on the level of absorbing sexual material from your partner, okay? And so the key idea in Fang Zhongshu, they weren't designed for men, or for women, sorry. They were designed for men. And the key idea is that the man engages in sex with a female partner and absorbs her energy, but doesn't finish him, You understand what I mean, right? And so by not finishing himself, he doesn't give up his energy. So he effectively steals the energy of the woman. And not only that, but by a certain point, it became increasingly popular that people liked to have, let's say, partners who were, from the modern perspective, not of the appropriate age. In other words, today this would be considered that this person would be a PDF file, if you understand what I mean. And that those partners shouldn't have been previously sexually active, right? So the first thing I want to say about bedroom arts is that broadly, as a category, they're, by modern standards, manipulative and abusive, okay? They're designed only to give benefit to the male partner, and they're designed with a very cynical idea in mind, which is stealing the energy of a young female partner. So that's the first thing. Now, where I want to give some pushback against, the Western scholars in this field is that a lot of people in modern history, okay, I graduated from a university history program, albeit I only have a bachelor's degree, but I study history and I understand the approach of historians, okay? And I want to say that the modern history field is highly prejudicial toward modern ideas. The worldview of the modern history field is always trying to subvert past histories in order to verify contemporary prejudices that historians have about culture, which means that it's often the case that historians view ancient phenomena in culture inaccurately because they want to verify their own worldview. This is a giant problem in the history field and in the humanities in general, okay? History is done inaccurately a lot of the time. And this is a good example because, as I said, I foolishly read the Wikipedia page. You should never do that. Wikipedia is an okay place. But if you want to do something and not have to have too much of a headache afterward, just don't read the Wikipedia page first. But anyway, so what I found was a number of scholars making these points that, these bedroom arts actually, they weren't only about male sexual pleasure, because the idea is that the woman has to be put into a frenzied sexual state so that her essence becomes mature so the man can absorb it. Excuse me, that is exactly the criticism that has been historically made against bedroom arts by Taoists. Okay, the whole idea is that they try to use the female partner to get her to produce more sexual energy so they can steal it. That has nothing to do with being thoughtful or considerate about your partner, okay? That is only about getting something that you want. It's a very repulsive idea. And in China, the bedroom arts were rightly let's say they were rightly criticized in later generations. There's a good reason for that, but let's get back to the Western scholars. So one of the contemporary popular ideas is that these arts started to fall apart after Confucianism, put the kibosh on them. Because the way that a lot of Western scholars think about Daoism and Confucianism is Daoism is free and it's open. It's just like in Zhuangzi, right? Everybody who's enlightened and free and cool are Taoists. And these Confucians are censorious and nasty guys. That's not necessarily the case, right? It's true, Confucianism came to a high place in the Chinese dynastic system, and they were able to censor things, right? That's totally true. But on the other hand, it's not just that. It's because it was a social problem. And there were a lot of Taoists who criticized bedroom arts. And I'll give you an example in just a second. But if you read Chinese articles on this subject, they don't say it was the Confucians that put the kibosh on it. They say it was the Buddhists, right? Because Buddhism was introduced into China in the early AD period, right? Like around, 100 or 200 AD. And Buddhism has strong regulations about regulating and controlling sexual desire. And so according to Chinese sources I read, as Buddhism became more popular, it became more important to people to regulate sexual behavior and sexual desire, right? It's really, really essential to look into the biases of academics, because especially in the Taoist field, and I'm sorry to have to say this, okay, but especially in the Taoist field, number one, the majority of academics are not practitioners, so they don't know anything about the practices. They just read books. They don't have teachings. Number two, a lot of them project their own values onto Taoism, which is sick. It's a culturally perverse thing to do. It's an imperialistic thing to do because it projects modern Western values onto another culture. But then at the same time, it's also perverse because it intentionally makes a misreading of history in order to get the answer you want to get. That's not scientific, okay? So it's better, I think, to understand bedroom arts from another perspective, which is to say there's a general tendency in bedroom arts toward privileging men. Now, if you look at Chinese history, this is no surprise, okay? Women in the Han Dynasty, right, the first major Chinese dynasty, let's say the Qin is the first dynasty, but the Han is the next one. Women were not in a dominant social position throughout the majority of the dynastic period of China. Doesn't mean that women didn't have any power. There's plenty of examples of female emperors like Wu Zetian and women who did incredible things right throughout Chinese history, not to diminish the role of women in Chinese history at all. But the culture was essentially patriarchal in very much the same way that European elite culture was patriarchal and Middle Eastern culture was patriarchal, right? This is approximately how early medieval and medieval civilizations operated. Unfortunately, if you're a modernist and you like gender equality, then this is an unfortunate fact of history, but it's mostly generally true, even though there are many instances in which women had incredible roles of power and did incredible things and subverted the mold, right? Having said that, it's unsurprising that the bedroom arts were essentially designed for men. But that doesn't mean that women never got any benefit from them. And it doesn't mean that they were universally always bad. We should think about history as trends that are informed by specific incidences of phenomena. Okay? It's not that history you can say all of one thing was good or all of one thing was bad. It's more mature to say that there were probably plenty of examples in which bedroom arts were used in a positive way that benefited women, but the general trend of bedroom arts was abusive and manipulative toward women. And it was designed in a sort of vampiric way that allowed men to take sexual advantage of women who were in a position that was marginalized. Okay, so I just wanted to get that out of the way. The next thing is, are there other Taoist arts that engage in sexual practice that are not Fang Zhongshu, that are not bedroom arts? And the answer here is, yeah, actually there are. So there's a style of internal alchemy practice called Yin Yang Shuangxiu, Yin and Yang dual cultivation. And that practice, my understanding is that it began to become popular around the Song dynasty. There's some argument that one of the major early Neidan traditions, called the Nanzong, the southern ancestor, practiced such arts. But it became especially popular during the Ming dynasty, so around the 1500s, or maybe just before or just after. And according to the Taoist scholar Hu Fuchen, Yin Yang Shuangxiu practice was especially popularized by Lu Xixing, the founder of the Eastern School of Internal Alchemy. Now, again, I'm not a practitioner. I'm stodgy and boring. I don't do any wild stuff. That's just my personal preference. And so I don't know how these arts were practiced. The other thing, according to Hu Fuchen, and also Hu Haiya, no relation, but another very influential modern Taoist thinker, this yin-yang dual cultivation art, it was predicated on the male and the female both cultivating the elixir, right? So they use sexual practice in order to generate energy together. And so then it would be an appropriate practice for husbands and wives, right? And this was something that has been an undercurrent in internal alchemy practice. And people in the world of Taoist self-cultivation tend to view dual cultivation in a more positive light than they view bedroom arts. So bedroom arts and dual cultivation are not the same thing. Incidentally, I've heard from a credible source that as recently as the 1980s, some priests in Taoist temples would teach their lay disciples, so that means non-initiate, or like not Taoist priests, right? Lay disciples rather than Taoist priests, how to practice yin and yang dual cultivation with their sexual partners or with their spouses. Okay, again, I've heard it from a source who I view as credible. I don't want to say much more than that about that topic. But then the question is, do people practice these arts in Taoist temples? And the answer is decisively no. Okay, so the reason why Daoism, okay, just to say this, Daoism can be separated approximately into three things in its most sort of coherent sense. The Chuanzhen school of Daoism, the complete reality school, is a school of renunciates. So they leave home. They don't have spouses, or they leave their spouses, and they live in a temple, or they become hermits. So that's the Chuanzhen school. So they're definitely not supposed to do any sex stuff. The Zhangyi school, or the Orthodox school, are householders. So they're initiates, they're Taoist initiates, they're priests or nuns, and they are allowed to have married partners, and they're allowed to have families. So hypothetically, yeah, maybe they could do those practices, but they're expected to regulate their lives in very specific ways, right? There's a lot of rules that religious Taoists have to follow. Then the third group is secular disciples of Taoism. And so those people they're not priests, they're not nuns. They maybe follow a priest or a nun, and the priest or nun will teach them. And they teach them, how to practice Taoism, how to properly do, let's say the people are involved in ceremony, okay, how to properly, pray, or how to properly meditate, or how to properly practice sexual intercourse together with their spouse, right? These are all things that are on the table for those secular disciples who don't become Taoist priests or nuns. So those practices, if they are taught, they're going to exist in that third group of people who are secular disciples. Now, look, I already know that there's some people who are fans of this whole Taoism as a philosophy, and it's not a religion thing, and I agree with you, okay? I think that Taoism is better understood by average people as a philosophical system. I'm just talking about Taoism as it has been in China for the last several hundred years, right? So we should disambiguate something. We should understand that this Taoist philosophy idea is a very modern idea, right? It started to be talked about in the 1920s approximately. because before that, nobody cared about the difference between philosophy and religion. Hey, you Taoist religious person, you Taoist philosophy person, you just do what you want. You study Taoism if you're a secular person. You like to read the Tao Te Ching and meditate, you do that. You like to pray to certain deities from, that protect your city, do that. Why do you have to care so much about this? But in modern times, because, and I'll make another video about this later, okay? Just anyway, Taoism in China, as it's practiced there, has its own flavor. And regardless of our preference about whether it's a philosophy or a religion, there's also just the way that it is naturally, right? So you should accept that. But anyway, so these yin and yang dual cultivation arts, they exist, but they're not that common, and there's really not any major classical documents explaining them clearly. Now, there's some argument made by some scholars like Hu Fuchen that Lu Xixing's writings are about that topic. And that may be true, right? There's some evidence that it's true. But, having said that, it's not easy to decipher if you don't have the teachings, and the teachings are kept secret. Why are the teachings kept secret? One of the big reasons is because Chinese feudal culture was conservative in nature, right? So there's just stuff, sexuality became a taboo over time, right? And so whatever people were doing in private was what they were doing in private. They didn't want to let other people know. So you're not going to, hammer up a shingle above your door that says, hey, this is where you find the Taoist sexual practices, right? And so in that sense, these things were passed down secretly, and there's nothing we can do about it. So if you've learned them, you've learned them. If you haven't learned them, you haven't learned them, right? That's it. And so they exist. I'm not that familiar with how they're practiced, but my understanding is that they're not abusive. They're meant to benefit both partners. And up into modern times, actually, it's really interesting. The Taoist thinker Chen Yingning, who's like the greatest figure in modern internal alchemy. Okay, this guy basically brought internal alchemy back from the grave. He actually communicated extensively with his students about this subject. So he had married students with whom he wrote back and forth about yin-yang paired cultivation. And so, this was definitely a thing that was promoted, well into the 20th century, and also in the Qigong world. And so this is where we're going to shift our topic a bit. In the Qigong world, sexual practices are quite common, right? And you can do sexual Qigong. It's a thing, right? You project qi to the other person, for instance, and you can really help them, right? So if you can project qi through your hands, or you can project qi through your intention, and they can project qi at the same time, then you can generate energy together, and then that can make both of you more healthy, and it can make it also so that you don't lose as much energy when you engage in sexual intercourse. Now, whether people actually lose energy in sexual intercourse is another topic, and I think I'll make another video about this because I don't want this to run past half an hour. But basically, in contemporary Qigong practice, there's a place for that. Again, I don't practice that, but many people do, and they're happy to do it. Having said that, Qigong has a problem that Taoism doesn't have. Like I said, Taoism is separated into two sects as well as a lay community, and those people all follow rules, right? So again, okay, I hear you say Taoism doesn't have any rules. The Tao Te Ching, the old Taoist philosophy books, they don't have rules that are written down, but the rules are meant to be discovered through your investigation of nature. Later, Taoism starts to adopt rules from Buddhism, starts to adopt rules from Confucianism, and it becomes quite rule-oriented. And so these Taoists, especially ones who are, clothed Taoists, right, especially priests and nuns, they have to follow a lot of rules. And so that means that there are ethical constraints on them which stop them from engaging in certain activity. And the laity, of course, in order to be in good standing with those Taoists that they learn from, then they have to follow rules too. And by the way, if a Taoist can do face reading, they know whether or not you're into sex stuff, okay? So they can see on your face whether or not you're, engaging in healthy behavior, okay? I'm going to leave it at that. But in Qigong culture, that requirement of ethics isn't present because Qigong is not a religion, right? So Qigong doesn't require you to believe in any kind of metaphysical stuff at all, right? You can practice Qigong as a complete secular person. You don't have to buy any Chinese religious or philosophical beliefs, and you can still practice Qigong. So one of the problems with Qigong is that it is anarchic and it is wild and it is out of control. And that's one of the big disasters in Qigong culture, is that anybody can do anything they want, and that leaves lots of room for bad people. Okay, so sexual Qigong is a big topic. And in the West, it's been really like, it was a driving force in Qigong in the 1980s and 90s. And in my opinion, the view that Western people have had about sexual practices in Qigong is cartoonishly silly. Okay, I'm not gonna call out any authors. I don't want to get sued, right? You'll know how to find them. It's cartoonishly silly. It just makes it out to be this thing which is sort of somehow an amalgam of 1960s free love hippie culture together with these bedroom arts, and these texts are taken way out of context and people come up with the wackiest ideas. It's just not a thing, right? But it's become a thing, right? It's just like how people look at Tantra and they imagine Tantra is all this sexy stuff. No, Tantra is a part of the traditional yoga tradition and also Tibetan Buddhism, right? It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with sex, but spin, marketing, money, right? All of these things unfortunately impact our ability to study these things. And before we had the internet, which is a wonderful and terrifying tool, but before we had the internet, hey, look, somebody can write whatever they want. It's true until somebody disproves them. If you didn't read the book that disproves them, hey, it's true, right? So all this modern crap about Qigong sexuality in Western countries in our literature from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s is mostly like a game of telephone, and it's cartoonishly silly. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to get into it too much, because if I talk about specific things, then it looks like I'm criticizing specific people, and that's not the right thing for me to do. I just mention it. Okay, but then one more thing I want to say is, how does internal alchemy view this stuff, right? So I mentioned that there are shuangxiu arts. There's yin-yang shuangxiu, yin-yang dual cultivation, or male-female dual cultivation. That's a thing. But did you know that in the Neidan books, there's an really, really detailed criticism of bedroom arts in a lot of Neidan books. So I'll call a couple books to mind. This is so interesting. Number one, the book Zhongheji, the anthology of the Way of Central Harmony by Li Daochun. So it's the representative first book of the middle school of internal alchemy. He has an entire chapter just ripping apart all of these crazy beliefs in Chinese culture at that time. So he says, some people like to collect their male sexual fluid and they drink it and they think it's medicine. Some people collect the female, menses, the female period blood, and they drink it and they hold that it's the medicine. Some people like to, suck it. They like to suck at the breast of a lactating mother, and they hold that boosts their chi. And other people, like to always keep like a stone pushed against their perineum, and they think that that's how they stop the essence from leaking. And all of these people are completely insane, right? Some people like to eat they eat the 自合成, right? The material that comes out after the baby has been born, right? They like to collect that and they eat that and they think they get energy from it, those people are completely insane, right? They're completely lost. Why does Li Daochun say that, right? The reason Li Daochun says that is because all of this stuff, it's beside the point. It's not that healthy for you, right? It's like all these crappy health trends. You gotta eat this thing today and that thing tomorrow and this and the other thing. And they all just give you a little tiny bit of benefit, but they don't have a big benefit in the long term, right? If you want to be healthy by diet, what do? You get your 3 macronutrients in sufficient quantities, and you get your micronutrients in sufficient quantities, right? So your macros are fat, protein, and carbohydrates, and your micros are all of the vitamins and minerals and those things, right? If you get them in sufficient quantity, your diet will essentially be healthy. And then if you need to be guided toward taking specific supplements or medicines by a medical practitioner, then, there may be merit to some of them, right? But you don't need to be obsessive, and definitely you wouldn't overlook your macronutrients in order to chase after rare antioxidants, right? So the same thing is true with self-cultivation practice. Live a normal, healthy life and you will approximately be healthy. If you have a health problem, you deal with that in a relevant way with medicine. If you want to practice internal alchemy, spend your time meditating properly, learn a real method, and then you'll develop the internal elixir and you'll make great progress. Don't waste your time doing, weirdo stuff that doesn't have great benefits. If it's your kink, that's fine. Okay, I'm not kink shaming here. But at the same time, don't imagine that, eating menstrual blood is going to give you a huge boost in your health. It's not. People have tried that before, right? The degree to which it helps you may be very, very limited, and in some capacities it might even hurt you, right? One of the big things in internal alchemy thinking is that if your mindset misunderstands Taoist longevity arts, you will become perverted. And if you become perverted, it's so much worse than almost anything, because your mindset will tend to deviate toward a very, very small, very petty, and very narrow conception of reality. What you want to understand in this kind of training, you want to realize how to become vast, open, understand a broad body of knowledge, and really genuinely allow your spiritual awareness to integrate with nature, right? That's the reality of internal alchemy practice. It's not anything about, I take this or that little medicine. Whether it's herbal medicine that you take to boost your kidney qi, or whether, you're eating amniotic fluid, right? All of those things are totally beside the point in internal alchemy, and you just shouldn't practice them. Unless they're required in the case of taking medicine, for instance, for an illness. Good diet, good sleep, good practice, good exercise, a happy social life, a happy family life, right? If you engage in sexual activity, healthy sexual activity with a loving partner, all of those things are a good recipe for a decent life. There's no need to chase after any of this stuff. You definitely don't need to steal other people's energy to be happy. And if you happen to learn dual cultivation or something like that, fine, that's fine, but don't let it become manipulative and abusive, right? Unlike some of the ancient Taoists and unlike some modern Qigong masters. And that's all I have to say about that subject. This has been a bit of a meta-analysis, right? It's a bit of a big picture. It's not so specific. Again, I'm not involved in those things. I don't know that much about them. But I do know enough about the general big picture of Daoism and the big picture of Qigong to be able to make a broad analysis of them, and also to be able to contest some of those ideas, I think, in Western scholarship that are they're a little bit grasping in a sense, right? They view history through this lens where your historical argument has to conform with the modern preferences of a very specific subset of people. And I don't want to get political here, right? Because in terms of liberty, right? I broadly agree with these academics that it's good for people to be liberated and to be able to do those things which bring them joy, right? I always hope that people will be able to attain joy within their life, and if they have some particular things that they like that historically have been frowned upon and they're not doing any harm to anybody, then who are you to criticize them? But then at the same time, be realistic about history. When things are negative, people abusing their sexual partners, you shouldn't twist it and say that, it was actually about the pleasure of the woman. You have to look more deeply into it. The reason it was about the pleasure of the woman was so that you could steal her essence as she produced more of it, right? That's actually, that's really bad, okay? And I'm sorry to end on a negative note, but I have to say that in a lot of ways, I find Taoist scholarship in the West to be a little bit repulsive, because a lot of the time they're twisting things in order to say what they want to say. That's not real. That's not science. Okay. Anyway, having said that, I hope this video was useful to you. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you disagree with me. Tell me in the comments, okay? And if you want to learn about different things in Qigong or in internal alchemy or other Chinese meditation practices, let me know, and I'll do my best to make a video about it for you. With that having been said, I hope that you'll press like, and I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Okay,